$300 billion in liabilities. Chinese real estate company Evergrande filed for bankruptcy protection in the U.S. Companies covering 40% of Chinese home sales have defaulted. And flooding continues in southern China. Torrents washing people away and streets turned to rivers. President Biden hosting two treaty allies, Japan and South Korea, today. A first standalone summit between the three powers. What message is it sending to China? What do you think? Let us know below and subscribe if you haven't already. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China's economy is crumbling, with property giant Evergrande now filing for bankruptcy protection in a U.S. court. It's adding to investors' growing fears about China's property debt crisis and its overall economy.
Evergrande was once China's top-selling developer, but is now the world's most indebted property company. It has more than $300 billion in liabilities. Evergrande has sought protection under Chapter 15 of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code. It shields non-U.S. companies undergoing restructurings from creditors that hope to sue them or tie up assets in the U.S. Evergrande declined to comment. The company's offshore debt restructuring involves a total of $31.7 billion. It will meet with its creditors later this month to discuss its restructuring proposal. A number of Chinese property developers have defaulted on their offshore debt obligations, leaving in its wake unfinished homes, plunging sales and battered investor confidence. The property sector makes up about a quarter of the economy. The crisis has led to a contagion risk, which could further hurt a Chinese economy already weakened by slower growth.
Taiwan-based China affairs analyst Edward Huang says it's impossible for Evergrande to declare bankruptcy in China because the Chinese regime will not allow it. But its situation in China is so bad that it's already bankrupt. Brian Mccarthy, chief strategist at Microlens, calls Evergrande dead man walking.
I don't think it really has any bearing on how we should view Evergrande, which is dead man walking for many, many months now.
He added foreign investors might be able to get a tiny part of what they invested back.
The offshore creditors, again, are, I don't know, 5 or 10 cents on the dollar. I think the recovery value is going to be very, very low.
And to investors in China, McCarthy says they will try to get their money out of China, triggering a huge financial outflow.
There's a loss. Now everybody realizes the loss. Nobody wants to get stuck with it. The only way to avoid getting stuck with some portion of it is to get out of RMB into dollars, right? So, this urgency to move money offshore is going to reach extreme levels.
McCarthy says if the Chinese Communist Party cannot sort out the property markets, it is a one-way train to hard times for the Chinese economy. And it's not just Evergrande. Country Garden, once China's largest property developer, is now also heavily in debt. This is triggering fresh contagion fears for China's $60 trillion worth of property sector.
Cash flow problems in China's real estate sector has some investors worried. They're concerned it could spill over into multiple sectors of the country's economy. Country Garden was China's largest property developer before this year, but it's now enduring a debt crisis, while one of China's top asset managers with major real estate exposure is also struggling. Zhongrong, a subsidiary of Zhongji Enterprise Group, has missed some repayment obligations, prompting investors to protest outside of its building in Beijing. The state of these firms has fueled worries the country's real estate woes may affect its $57 trillion financial industry. It has also highlighted the potential of outsized exposure of China's $3 trillion shadow banking sector to the property sector. Gary is a senior economist at Natixis.
As long as the problem in the cash flow of developers are not solved, it's possible to see more credit events like this here and there across the shadow banking sector.
Since the sector's debt crisis unfolded in mid-2021, companies accounting for 40% of Chinese home sales have defaulted. Most of them were private property developers. It has led to many unfinished homes, unpaid suppliers and creditors. Those creditors are not only financial institutions, but also ordinary people who bought wealth management products linked to trust financing. China's property sector accounts for more than half of global new home sales and home building, with an estimated market value of around 62 trillion.
And flooding continues in China. In southern China's Guangdong province, heavy rain hit the city of Dongguan on Friday. Videos shared on social media show water pouring into an underground parking lot and a man being washed away. Streets are turned into rivers, with cars and refrigerators floating on top. Since the end of July, heavy rain has led flooding in a number of provinces in northern China. On top of that, some local authorities caused even more damage by releasing excess floodwater from local reservoirs without warning residents. Millions of Chinese people are impacted by the floods. For the first time ever, President Biden is hosting a standalone summit with leaders from Japan and South Korea at Camp David in Maryland. Beijing is lashing out, with Chinese state media accusing the three countries of forming a mini NATO. NTD's Iris Tao brings us the highlights.
This is a historic moment as U.S., Japan, and South Korea came together to hold their first ever standalone summit. And this is also the first time that President Biden has hosted foreign leaders at Camp David, which is a rustic mountain retreat in Maryland where a lot of important diplomatic moments happened in history. And today, as we are facing this rising threat from China, President Biden vowed to start this new era of trilateral cooperation with Japan and South Korea to bolster security. Here's what he said during their meetings.
As we begin this new era of cooperation and renew our resolve to serve as a force of good across the Indo-Pacific and, quite frankly, around the world as well.
So later in the afternoon, they held a trilateral press conference in the woods of Camp David. And while there, they announced that these three countries are going to have a new security agreement in which they're going to consult each other if and when a crisis happens in the Pacific region. So that's a new thing. And they're also announcing new military exercises every year, as well as annual meetings among their leaders, among a variety of other items to cooperate on, of course. But this is not a mutual defense agreement like NATO. But China does not see it that way, with Beijing already accusing these three leaders of trying to start a mini NATO in the Pacific region. The White House this morning denied that, and President Biden said during the press conference that this whole summit was not about China, but he said that China did come up, and the leaders expressed concerns about China's economic coercion as well as the tensions that it's creating in the Pacific region. And here's what else he said. Watch.
And today, we've all reaffirmed our shared commitment to maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits and addressing economic coercion. Together, we're going to stand up for international law, freedom of navigation, and the peaceful resolution of disputes in the South China Sea.
And the joint statement issued by the three countries afterwards also directly called out China's, quote, dangerous and aggressive behavior in the South China Sea. And they again affirmed the importance of peace in the Taiwan Strait. So it's pretty significant how South Korea and Japan actually came together to have this direct mention of China in their statement, especially given how much their economies actually depend on trade with China. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
A success for China hawks. A Florida law barring Chinese citizens from buying homes in the state will remain in place. A group of Chinese living in Florida wanted to overturn the law, but a U.S. judge denied their request.
The law bans any citizens in adversary countries from purchasing land or buildings in Florida. Those designated as countries of concern include China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others. If a Chinese person is naturalized or has a green card, he isn't subject to this limitation. The law went into effect last month. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says it will help protect Americans from the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. DeSantis signed the law in May. Right after that, a group of Chinese citizens filed a counter lawsuit. They claimed the law violates the U.S. Constitution and the Federal Fair Housing Act, which prohibits housing discrimination based on race and national origin. Judge Ellen Windsor said on Thursday the ban is based only on citizenship, meaning it could apply to individuals who are not originally from China but have Chinese citizenship. so it doesn't discriminate based on the basis of any protected traits.
In response to Xi's so-called Be Patient appeal, investors have sold $7.4 billion worth of Chinese stocks, despite the State Council's promising a better investment environment. Hong Kong's Stock Connect trading scheme released this data. China's stock market is facing the biggest depression in decades. Chinese stock deals in the U.S. have dropped from $3.4 billion to $200 million, hitting the lowest point in 17 years. And this case is not isolated. Chinese deals are also showing weakness among other major countries like the UK, Germany, and Australia. The managing director of China's Beige Book sheds light on why companies aren't buying up Beijing's promises anymore.
Political risk is a term that gets thrown around all the time. Companies need to become very, very serious about how they assess their risk.
On the political front, tensions are worsening between the U.S. and China. And China's rising threats to Taiwan are concerning to the global economy.
And with the new law changes that are taking place, it's only going to get more and more difficult.
President Biden's sanctions on high-tech investment to China also hinders the flow. This year, U.S. direct investment to China is seeing its lowest point in 2 decades. Discussions about China's plunging fertility rate are making the CCP censors nervous. A related hashtag became the top trend on Chinese social media platform Weibo before it was wiped from the internet. Here's more.
New data is out on China's fertility rate and it's looking grim. The number hit a record low of 1.09 in 2022. Fertility rate measures the number of births per woman. Now, China's fertility rate is among the world's lowest, alongside South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. The news climbed to the top of social media searches before it got censored. Davey Wong, an economics expert, says the data indicates China is becoming an aging society. He said it's concerning.
Unlike Japan, South Korea, and America, China doesn't really have an influx of immigrants. Also, the country's social security system is not doing well. It's lacking in many regards, like pension, medical care, health care, and social benefits programs. The Chinese regime doesn't really help much. In the United States, the government gives out a lot of aid for education and medical services.
For the past 3 decades, Beijing allowed most Chinese couples to have only 1 child. The Chinese regime dropped its one-child policy in 2016, but birth rates are not picking up. That's despite the CCP encouraging couples to have more children. A women's rights activist told NTD that there's a lack of trust in the Chinese regime right now.
When they thought there were too many people, they pushed for the one-child policy and even forced some women to abort their second babies. Even if citizens are glad to see that authorities are not forcing them to abort their babies, how can you guarantee that they won't switch their policies tomorrow?
The high costs for childcare are also making couples think twice about having more children. China tops the chart when it comes to childcare costs. A report last year ranked the country as the second most expensive place to raise a kid globally, following South Korea.
A group of countries are set to challenge the U.S.-led world order, and they will hold their 15th government summit in South Africa next week. Let's dive in.
Leaders of countries that account for more than a quarter of the global economy are set to meet in South Africa. Up for discussion at the BRICS summit, starting on August 22nd, how to turn this loose club of nations into a geopolitical force capable of challenging the West's dominance in global affairs. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The leaders of those countries will be in physical attendance, with one notable exception. That's Russian President Vladimir Putin, who faces an international arrest warrant over alleged war crimes in Ukraine, though he is expected to attend virtually. Few details have emerged about what BRICS leaders plan to discuss. However, expansion is expected to be high on the agenda. Some 40 nations have shown an interest in joining, either formally or informally, officials have said, including Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and Egypt. However, there could be tensions. China wants to enlarge BRICS quickly as it tussles with the United States for geopolitical influence. Brazil is resisting, fearing the already unwieldy club could see its stature diluted. Russia is keen to bring in new members as it seeks friends amid its diplomatic isolation over Ukraine. Its most important African ally, South Africa, is on the same page. India is on the fence. What unites the bloc, though, is skepticism about a world order they see as serving the interests of the United States and its rich country allies. BRICS nations are keen to project themselves as alternative development partners to the West. The bloc's new development bank wants to de-dollarize finance and offer an alternative to the IMF and the World Bank. However, it's only approved $33 billion of loans in nearly a decade. That's about a third of the amount the World Bank committed to disbursing just last year. The NDB has also been hobbled by sanctions on Russia. South African officials say talk of a BRICS currency, mooted by Brazil earlier this year as an alternative to dollar dependence, is off the table.
Institutional development of BRICS.
Nevertheless, South Africa's Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor has said BRICS wants to show leadership, particularly in terms of the development and inclusion of the Global South in multilateral systems. The theme of the Johannesburg summit is BRICS and Africa. That emphasises how the bloc can build ties on a continent increasingly becoming a theatre for competition between world powers.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. How does China's floundering property sector impact America? Indebted Chinese property giant Evergrande now filing for bankruptcy protection in New York. What's at stake in U.S.-China ties? We hear from a geopolitical expert and publisher for more. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epic TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you soon.